Hello everyone, time for another Read Aloud with Mr. Harms. Really miss you guys, can't wait to see you again. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to read you an old classic, and by classic I mean something that I read as a child. But this book actually was a classic well before I was born. This book is called Make Way for Ducklings. Wonderful book. Again, read it as a child, probably got it through the Scholastic Book Order when I was about your age or younger. This is a newer copy, but this is by Robert McCloskey, Make Way for Ducklings, and the copyright date is 1941. So I wasn't born for another 19 years after that, so it's been around for a while. But I think as a kid, one of the things I really enjoyed about the book is it's about these ducks looking for a place to live and raise a family. And they end up in Boston, Massachusetts, which, some of you may know was a big colonial town before we even became the United States. And, of course, now it's a major metropolis on the East Coast, Boston, Massachusetts, big harbor in there. You've got Harvard University, Cambridge, all these great schools, MIT. It's a big, bustling place. And what was neat about this book is the author, who also did the illustrations, he draws the architecture so well, and you get a really a good feel for the public spaces and the buildings, and it as a child I thought, wow, that's really cool. I mean, I really enjoyed the drawing, and some of you who are into the really well drawn pictures and buildings and scenes that you see in so many of the graphic novels nowadays. I mean, this for me was kind of that. I really enjoyed the illustrations, and of course it's got ducks. I mean, who doesn't like ducks? So here we go. Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. So here they are looking for a place to live. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. A beautiful public garden in the middle of a very big city. Next morning they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. So you notice, all the benches and people in the benches, statues. Here's some of the big old buildings behind. I thought that was really cool. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer. But the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all round the pond and got another breakfast better than the first. So this is one of the famous swan boats, which, from what I gather, they're still there. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond?" Excuse me. "There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But, now see if you can figure out what's going to happen here. All right, here are Mr. and Mrs. Mallard. And we got a couple of guys here on bikes, right? Make a prediction. What could happen? "Look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. "You'll get run over!" And when she got her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies, with all these horrid things rushing about. We'll have to look somewhere else." And I love Mr. Mallard. Weebk, I guess. This is a man with a mission here. He's going somewhere fast. All right. So maybe not as safe as they had hoped. So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, but there was no place there. Again, here's one of those great architectural drawings that I really enjoyed when I was about your age. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. When we read The Magician's Nephew, these kind of remind me of the row houses, right? One right next to another. Maybe they had shared attics too. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings." So flying over the river, there's this cool bridge and a little island in the water. Looks like a safe place. So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. So we learned a little something about duck physiology right there. Okay, so here they are on the island near the bridge. There's Mrs. Mallard on her nest. Got it? These cool old-fashioned towers there on the bridge. Don't know if they're still there. I imagine they might be. But of course, they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman named Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that, the Mallards called on Michael every day. So here's Michael. And the Mallards, you can see their island in the background, and the bridge, and Michael feeding them peanuts. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. It's like, yep, 1, 2, counting. Did you know that ducks could count? They probably can, in some fashion. Well, now you're going to find out that ducks name their babies, so get ready for the names. One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, and then Lack, then Mack, and Knack, and Whack, and Pack, and Quack. You get that? Right? J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q. Pretty smart. And they all rhyme with quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. I wonder which one's which. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. A little bit of pollution even back in 1941. So she taught them how to swim and dive. She taught them how to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. Get in line, chicks. Ducklings, I guess. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell into line, just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. You gotta see these names here, okay. I'm not sure what you do with Whack. O-U-A-C-K. That's a tough one. There they waded ashore and waddled along until they came to the highway. And I will venture that today that highway is probably a lot bigger and wider and built up than it was in 1941. But I love this. You can see down the street here. See? That's cool. You can see the tall church tower. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk, went the horns on the speeding cars. Quack, went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Quack, 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 went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. Here we go. See their little tiny quacks down there? Honk, quack. A lot of noise. Love those old-fashioned cars, too. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. Michael, the policeman, to the rescue. What's he going to do? He's going to arrest the ducklings? That doesn't sound right. He placed himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. Oh. So he stopped the cars so they could cross the street. I like Mrs. Mallard here. She's kind of like, see? You have to stop for me. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. You see him right there. There they go. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks!" yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick!" Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned into Charles Street, with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. So I imagine in those days that was a pretty well-known bookstore. It's probably an internet cafe now. You can check that out on Google Maps. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the street said, "Well now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. So her little babies. She's like, "Yeah, I did a good job. My ducklings behave." When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the Ducklings could march across the street. Here they are, stopping traffic. There they go, crossing the street over to the park. Right on into the public garden. Like all the people like, what? Inside the gate, they all turned round to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved and said goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. So here they are. There's Mr. Mallard. The Ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long they follow the swan boats and eat peanuts. So here's the park and the pond and a swan boat, and I'm guessing there are the ducks and ducklings. And that is the end. So Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey, a classic. You should all know this book. Now you do. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everyone's safe and healthy at home. And again, I hope to see you soon. Take care, everyone.